Danny Rodriguez had packed his bag with trembling hands, every muscle in his body screaming from weeks of punishment. He limped toward the bell, the symbol of surrender that would end his SEAL dream for good. 8 relentless weeks of mud, failure, and exhaustion had broken him down. He wasn't the toughest, the fastest, or the smartest, and he couldn't take one more day of humiliation. The other candidates barely looked up. Everyone knew what it meant when a man walked toward the bell with that look in his eyes. No one tried to stop him. Why would they? SEAL training wasn't for almosts. It was for the elite. And Danny, in that moment, felt like the farthest thing from it. But just as his hand reached for the rope, a weathered palm landed gently on his shoulder. Danny turned to see an old man standing there, civilian clothes faded by time, boots dusty, eyes sharp despite the wrinkles. "Pain is temporary," the man said in a calm, low voice. "But quitting lasts forever." Danny had never seen him before. No ID badge, no rank. But something in that voice stopped him cold. There was steel in it. Loss. Experience. A kind of quiet authority you couldn't fake. In that moment, Danny realized this wasn't just a random stranger. This was someone who had rung that bell once and spent a lifetime regretting it. Welcome to Silent Salute, where we discover that salvation sometimes comes from the most unexpected sources. Before we continue this powerful story, tell us in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today. And if you believe that the right words at the right moment can change everything, hit that subscribe button to support our channel. We're honored to share these life-changing stories with you. Danny Rodriguez had dreamed of becoming a Navy SEAL since he was 14 years old. Growing up in East Los Angeles, he'd used that dream to escape the gang violence and limited opportunities that claimed so many of his childhood friends. While others looked for quick money and street respect, Danny focused on physical training, academic achievement, and the discipline he'd need to survive the most demanding military training in the world. His path to Coronado had been neither easy nor guaranteed. As the son of undocumented immigrants who worked multiple jobs to support their family, Danny understood sacrifice and hard work better than most candidates. He'd earned his high school diploma while working part-time to help with family expenses, completed 2 years of community college on academic scholarships, and enlisted in the Navy with the sole objective of qualifying for SEAL training. The first 6 weeks of basic underwater demolition/SEAL training had been everything Danny expected and worse. The physical demands pushed his body beyond limits he'd thought possible. The mental stress tested his resolve in ways that academic challenges never had. The constant evaluation and potential for elimination created pressure that made every day feel like a test he might fail. But Danny had survived those first 6 weeks, along with 18 other candidates from the original class of 32. He'd made it through the initial physical conditioning, learned basic military procedures, and begun developing the mental toughness that characterized successful SEAL candidates. Week 7 was different. This was when BUD/S training shifted from testing basic military capability to evaluating the psychological resilience needed for special operations. The physical challenges became more complex, the mental pressure increased, and the margin for error decreased dramatically. Danny had started the week with confidence built through 6 weeks of incremental progress. He'd consistently met physical standards, avoided major disciplinary issues, and maintained the academic performance needed to continue in the program. But by Wednesday of week 7, everything was falling apart. The trouble started during a navigation exercise that required candidates to move through challenging terrain using only map and compass skills. Danny had always struggled with land navigation, but he'd managed to meet minimum standards through careful preparation and conservative route planning. This exercise was different. The terrain was more complex, the time constraints were tighter, and the consequences of navigation errors were immediate and public. Danny became lost within the first hour, spent 3 hours trying to reorient himself, and finally arrived at the objective 6 hours behind the time limit. The public critique of his performance was devastating. In front of his entire class, instructors dissected every navigation error, questioned his preparation methods, and suggested that his performance indicated fundamental unsuitability for special operations. Rodriguez, Chief Petty Officer Williams, had said with the cold authority that made SEAL instructors legendary for their ability to break weak candidates, "Navigation is a basic survival skill. If you can't find your way across 20 miles of California hills, how are you going to operate in hostile territory where getting lost means dying? Danny's confidence, built through 6 weeks of gradual progress, crumbled under the weight of public failure and professional criticism. For the first time since arriving at Coronado, he began to question whether he belonged in SEAL training. The doubt that started with navigation failure spread to other areas of his performance. During physical training sessions, Danny found himself comparing his capabilities to other candidates and focusing on his limitations rather than his strengths. Academic sessions became exercises in anxiety rather than learning opportunities. Most damaging was the erosion of his relationships with other candidates. SEAL training created intense bonds between candidates who supported each other through shared challenges. But Danny's growing self-doubt made him withdraw from team activities and isolate himself from the mutual support that sustained most candidates through difficult periods. By Friday of Week 7, Danny's performance had declined across all areas of evaluation. His physical training times were getting slower, his academic scores were dropping, and his participation in team exercises had become minimal and ineffective. The instructors noticed Danny's decline immediately. SEAL training was designed to identify and eliminate candidates who couldn't handle the psychological pressure of special operations, and Danny's performance pattern indicated he was approaching the breaking point. Rodriguez, Instructor Martinez, had said after Danny's poor performance during a combat swimming exercise, "You need to decide whether you want to be here or not. Half-hearted effort isn't good enough for SEAL training." The comment was intended as motivation, but it had the opposite effect on Danny. Instead of inspiring greater effort, it confirmed his growing belief that he didn't belong in SEAL training and was wasting everyone's time by continuing. Over the weekend, Danny's doubts crystallized into a decision that would change his life. He was going to quit SEAL training. The decision brought both relief and devastation. Relief from the constant pressure and fear of failure, but devastation at the collapse of dreams that had sustained him through years of preparation and sacrifice. Sunday evening, Danny packed his personal belongings into the sea bag that had carried his possessions from boot camp to SEAL training. Tomorrow morning, he would approach the brass bell that hung near the training compound entrance, ring it 3 times, and place his helmet below it in the ceremony that marked voluntary withdrawal from SEAL training. He'd seen other candidates make that walk over the past 7 weeks. Some left quietly, accepting that SEAL training wasn't for them. Others left in tears, devastated by the collapse of dreams they'd carried for years. A few left angrily, blaming instructors or training methods for their failure. Danny planned to leave quietly. He would ring the bell, collect his orders for reassignment to conventional Navy duties, and begin the process of building a different military career. It wasn't the future he'd planned, but it was better than continuing to fail in front of people whose respect he'd never earn. Monday morning, Danny rose before reveille and dressed in utilities for the last time as a SEAL candidate. He shouldered his sea bag and walked slowly toward the training compound entrance where the brass bell waited. The walk felt longer than it actually was. With each step, Danny was leaving behind years of dreams and months of sacrifice. But he was also escaping the daily humiliation of failing to meet standards that had proven beyond his capabilities. Other candidates were beginning to stir in the barracks behind him, preparing for another day of training that would test their limits and potentially eliminate more members of their class. Danny was grateful he wouldn't have to face another day of public failure and instructor criticism. The brass bell was mounted on a post near the entrance to the training compound, visible to everyone entering or leaving the facility. Below it was a growing line of helmets left by candidates who'd rung the bell and ended their SEAL dreams. Danny approached the bell with the resignation of someone who'd accepted an inevitable outcome. He reached up to grasp the rope that would ring the bell and officially end his participation in SEAL training. That's when the hand rested on his shoulder and the voice spoke that would change everything. Danny turned to see an old man standing behind him, maybe 70 years old, wearing faded jeans and a worn work shirt that suggested physical labor rather than military service. His hair was gray and thinning. His face was lined with wrinkles that spoke of decades in the sun, and his hands were calloused and scarred. But his eyes were different. They held the kind of depth that came from seeing things most people never experienced, and they were focused on Danny with an intensity that suggested this wasn't a casual encounter. "Son," the old man said quietly, That bell's been hanging there for 40 years. It'll still be there tomorrow if you decide you need to ring it. But once you ring it, you can't unring it. Danny's hand was still on the rope, but he paused to look more closely at the stranger who'd interrupted his moment of surrender. I appreciate the advice, Danny said, but you don't understand my situation. I don't belong here. I'm not cut out for this training. The old man's smile was gentle, but carried something that might have been recognition. Son, every man who's ever rung that bell thought the same thing. And every man who graduated from this training thought the same thing at least once during the process. Danny was curious despite his determination to quit. Are you a veteran? Did you go through SEAL training? The old man's answer was indirect, but somehow conveying more information than a simple yes or no would have provided. I've been through training that makes this place look like summer camp. But the principles are the same everywhere. You find out who you really are when everything hurts and nothing seems possible. Danny was still holding the rope, but his focus had shifted from ringing the bell to understanding who this man was and why he'd appeared at this moment. What kind of training makes SEAL training look like summer camp? The old man's expression grew distant, as if he were remembering experiences that were difficult to discuss. The kind of training where failure means more than going back to conventional military duty. The kind where the only way out is through, and giving up isn't an option that exists. Danny was beginning to sense that this wasn't just an old veteran offering generic motivation. There was something specific and personal about the man's comments that suggested he understood exactly what Danny was experiencing. Sir, why are you here? Why are you talking to me? The old man's answer revealed that this encounter wasn't accidental. Because 42 years ago, I was standing exactly where you're standing, holding that same rope, ready to ring that same bell. And someone talked me out of making the biggest mistake of my life. Danny released his grip on the rope and turned to face the old man fully. What happened? Did you complete training? I completed training, served 28 years in special operations, and dedicated my life to something bigger than myself. But more importantly, I learned that the moment you want to quit is usually the moment right before you discover what you're really capable of. The old man gestured toward the training compound where candidates were beginning to gather for morning physical training. Every man in there is scared, exhausted, and wondering if he belongs. The only difference between the ones who make it and the ones who don't is what they do with those feelings. Danny was listening intently, recognizing that this conversation was different from the motivational speeches instructors had given throughout his training. Sir, what's your name? How do you know about SEAL training? The old man hesitated before answering, as if deciding how much of his background to reveal. My name is William Torres, and I know about SEAL training because I helped develop some of the methods they still use here. Danny realized he was talking to someone whose involvement with SEAL training went far beyond simply completing the program. Torres had been part of creating the training that was now testing Danny's limits. Mr. Torres, you helped develop SEAL training? Torres nodded. After I completed operational assignments, I spent 8 years here as an instructor and training developer. I watched thousands of candidates go through this program, and I learned to recognize the ones who were capable of succeeding but didn't know it yet. Danny was beginning to understand that Torres' appearance wasn't coincidental. Are you saying you think I can succeed in this training? Torres' answer was direct and specific. Son, I've been watching your performance for 3 weeks. You have the physical capability, the mental intelligence, and the character foundation needed for special operations. What you don't have is the experience to recognize those qualities in yourself. Danny was surprised that Torres had been observing his performance. You've been watching me train? I watch all the candidates. This training is my life's work, and I care about every man who attempts it. But you're different because you're quitting for the wrong reasons. Torres explained his assessment of Danny's situation. You're not quitting because you can't handle the physical demands or because you don't want to be a SEAL. You're quitting because you had one bad week and you're letting that temporary failure define your entire self-worth. Danny felt exposed, as if Torres had identified thoughts and feelings he'd been hiding from himself. But I failed the navigation exercise completely. I embarrassed myself in front of everyone. Torres' laugh was understanding rather than dismissive. Son, I failed that same navigation exercise twice during my training. The man who talked me out of quitting failed it 3 times. Failure during training isn't a prediction of operational capability. It's part of the learning process. Danny was processing this new perspective on his recent struggles. but the instructors said my performance indicated I wasn't suitable for special operations. The instructors are doing their job, Torres explained. They're applying pressure to see how you respond. The candidates who break under that pressure in training would break under operational stress. But the candidates who learn from failure and come back stronger, those are the ones who succeed in actual missions. Torres gestured toward the bell that Danny had been about to ring. That bell represents the easy choice. Ring it, and all the pressure stops immediately. But it also represents permanent surrender of everything you've worked toward. Danny was beginning to understand that his decision to quit might be premature. Mr. Torres, what should I do? How do I know if I should continue or quit? Torres' answer would change Danny's entire approach to the remaining weeks of training. Son, you should continue until they tell you to leave. Don't make their decision for them. Make them work to eliminate you if they think you don't belong here. But Torres had more to share that would fundamentally change Danny's understanding of his situation and his potential for success in SEAL training. Danny, Torres said, using his first name for the first time, there's something else you should know about why I've been watching your training so closely. Danny was curious about the personal interest Torres seemed to have in his success or failure. 42 years ago, when I was standing where you're standing, ready to quit SEAL training, the man who talked me out of it was your grandfather. Danny felt like he'd been hit by lightning. His grandfather had died when Danny was 8 years old, and while Danny knew he'd served in the military, the family had never discussed the details of his service. My grandfather was a SEAL? Danny asked, struggling to process this revelation. Torres nodded. Staff Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez, one of the finest men I ever served with. He saved my life twice during our operational deployment, and he saved my career by preventing me from quitting training. Danny was reeling from the discovery that his grandfather, who he'd remembered as a quiet man who worked construction and told stories about his time in the Navy, had been a member of the most elite military unit in the world. Why didn't my family ever tell me about my grandfather's SEAL service? Torres' expression grew sad. Because your grandfather's service included classified operations that he couldn't discuss with family. He carried those secrets his entire life to protect the people he loved from knowing about the dangerous things he'd done in their name. Danny was beginning to understand that his grandfather's quiet demeanor had concealed extraordinary experiences and sacrifices that had shaped his character in ways the family never understood. Mr. Torres, what was my grandfather like as a SEAL? Torres' answer revealed a side of Danny's grandfather that the family had never known. Miguel was the kind of operator who never left anyone behind, never complained about impossible missions, and never let personal concerns interfere with team success. He was what every SEAL aspires to be. Torres continued, but more importantly, Miguel understood that being a SEAL wasn't about individual heroics or personal glory. It was about serving something bigger than yourself and taking care of the people who depended on you. Danny was processing the implications of learning that his grandfather had been a SEAL and that Torres had served with him. Is that why you've been watching my training? Because of my grandfather? Torres' answer revealed the depth of obligation he felt toward Miguel Rodriguez and his family. Partly, I owed your grandfather my life and my career. When I learned that his grandson was attempting SEAL training, I felt obligated to provide the same support he'd given me. But Torres had more to reveal about Danny's family history that would further change his understanding of his own potential. Danny, your grandfather didn't just prevent me from quitting training. He taught me something about mental toughness that I've spent 40 years sharing with SEAL candidates. Torres explained the lesson that Miguel Rodriguez had shared during Torres' moment of doubt. He told me that the human mind creates limitations that don't actually exist. We convince ourselves we can't do something before we've really tested our capabilities. The secret to completing SEAL training isn't superhuman ability. It's refusing to accept artificial limitations. Danny was beginning to understand that his recent struggles might be more about mental limitations than physical or intellectual inadequacy. Miguel used to say that pain is just information, Torres continued. It tells you that something is difficult, but it doesn't tell you that something is impossible. The candidates who quit are usually the ones who mistake difficulty for impossibility. Torres looked directly at Danny with the intensity of someone delivering a crucial message. Your grandfather saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. He recognized potential that I was about to throw away because I was scared and tired and convinced I wasn't good enough. Danny was listening with complete attention, understanding that this conversation was about more than just SEAL training. Danny, I see the same potential in you that Miguel saw in me. You have your grandfather's character, his determination, and his unwillingness to give up on people who matter to him. But you also have his tendency to be too hard on yourself when things don't go perfectly. Torres' assessment of Danny's character was based on weeks of observation and decades of experience with SEAL candidates. You're not failing because you lack ability. You're struggling because you're trying to meet standards that don't actually exist. Danny was confused by this distinction. What do you mean by standards that don't exist? Torres explained the psychological trap that eliminated many capable candidates. You're not competing against some theoretical perfect SEAL candidate. You're competing against yourself and your own limitations. The instructors aren't looking for perfection. They're looking for people who can improve under pressure and learn from mistakes. Torres gestured toward the training compound where other candidates were visible conducting morning physical training. Every man in there has failed multiple exercises, made mistakes that embarrassed them, and wondered if they belonged in SEAL training. The difference is that some of them use failure as motivation to improve, while others use it as evidence that they should quit. Danny was beginning to understand that his recent navigation failure might be less significant than he'd assumed. Are you saying that failing one exercise doesn't disqualify me from SEAL training? I'm saying that learning from failure is more important than avoiding failure, Torres replied. Miguel used to tell me that the military doesn't need people who never make mistakes. It needs people who make mistakes, learn from them, and don't make the same mistakes twice. Torres shared a specific example from his own training that illustrated this principle. During my training, I failed the same combat swimming exercise 3 times. Each time, I learned something new about technique, preparation, or mental approach. By the time I passed it on the 4th attempt, I understood swimming tactics better than candidates who passed on their first try. Danny was processing the idea that his recent struggles might be part of the learning process rather than evidence of unsuitability for SEAL training. Mr. Torres, if I continue training, how do I know if I'm improving or just prolonging inevitable failure? Torres' answer provided the framework Danny needed to evaluate his own progress objectively. You measure improvement by comparing your current performance to your past performance, not by comparing yourself to other candidates. As long as you're getting better than you were, you're moving in the right direction. Torres also provided perspective on the psychological pressure that had been overwhelming Danny. The instructors are supposed to make you doubt yourself. They're testing your mental resilience, not just your physical capability. The candidates who survive are the ones who maintain confidence in their potential despite temporary setbacks. Danny was beginning to understand that his decision to quit might be based on misunderstanding the purpose and nature of SEAL training challenges. Torres' final piece of advice connected Danny's immediate decision about continuing training to larger questions about the kind of person he wanted to become. Danny, the choice you make right now isn't just about SEAL training. It's about how you'll handle difficult challenges for the rest of your life. If you quit when things get hard here, you'll quit when things get hard everywhere else. Torres explained the broader implications of perseverance versus surrender. Miguel didn't just teach me to complete SEAL training. He taught me that the habit of not giving up becomes the foundation for everything else you accomplish in life. Danny looked at the brass bell one more time, then back at Torres, who represented a connection to his grandfather and a perspective on his potential that he'd never considered. Mr. Torres, what would my grandfather want me to do? Torres' answer was immediate and certain. Miguel would want you to find out what you're really capable of before you decide you're not capable enough. He would want you to honor the sacrifices he made by not giving up on dreams he would have supported. Danny made his decision. Instead of ringing the bell, he shouldered his sea bag and walked back toward the barracks where other candidates were preparing for another day of training. Torres watched him go with satisfaction, understanding that he'd fulfilled an obligation to Miguel Rodriguez while potentially saving another capable candidate from making a premature decision to quit. Danny's return to training was noticed immediately by instructors and candidates alike. Word spread quickly that he'd been seen approaching the bell, but had returned to the barracks without ringing it. Chief Williams approached Danny during morning formation. Rodriguez, I understand you reconsidered your decision to withdraw from training. Danny's response reflected his new understanding of the training process. Yes, Chief. I realized I was quitting for the wrong reasons. Williams nodded approval. Rodriguez, second thoughts about quitting are normal. What matters is what you do with those thoughts. Danny's performance immediately improved, not because his physical capabilities had changed, but because his mental approach had been transformed by Torres' perspective on failure, learning, and perseverance. The navigation exercise that had triggered his crisis of confidence became an opportunity to demonstrate improvement rather than evidence of inadequacy. Danny requested additional practice sessions, studied navigation techniques more systematically, and approached subsequent exercises with confidence based on preparation rather than fear based on previous failure. His relationships with other candidates also improved as he stopped isolating himself and began participating fully in team activities. The mutual support that characterized successful SEAL candidates became available to Danny once he stopped withdrawing from team relationships. Most importantly, Danny's understanding of the training process changed from viewing it as a series of tests he might fail to seeing it as a series of learning opportunities that would prepare him for operational success. 6 weeks later, Danny graduated from BUD/S training in the middle of his class, having demonstrated steady improvement and the mental resilience needed for special operations service. Torres attended Danny's graduation ceremony, standing in the back of the audience with the satisfaction of someone who'd honored a debt to a fallen comrade while helping another young man discover his potential. After the ceremony, Danny approached Torres to thank him for the intervention that had changed his life. "Mr. Torres,